Hello and welcome to a new Envato Tuts Plus course. I'm Adi Purdila, and in this course you'll learn the basics of designing a WordPress theme. Now, for this theme, we'll take a slightly different approach. Instead of designing it page by page, we'll build a design system for it. If you want to learn more about design systems, we also have a course on that topic, so make sure you check out the link down below. Essentially, a design system is a collection of components, guidelines, and best practices for a specific project. In our case, we're going to start by defining our colors, typography, sizing, and spacing. We're going to build our core components, and then at the end, as a demo, we're going to take all of this and we'll design the index page. So let's take a look at how we're going to structure this course. First, we'll make the necessary preparations. The first elements in a design system are color, typography, spacing, and sizing. We'll define these in the first chapter. In the second chapter, we'll start designing the basic components or patterns, things like buttons, forms, menus, tables, and so on. The third chapter is about the more advanced patterns like WordPress widgets, posts, headers, and footers. In the final chapter, we'll define some page layouts, and also, as a demo, we'll design the full index page based on our design system. All right, we have a lot to cover, so let's get started with the first lesson where we'll discuss some design consideration for building WordPress themes. See you there. Hello and welcome to the first lesson of this course where we'll take a look at a few design considerations when building WordPress themes. But first things first, what is WordPress? Well, WordPress is a content management system. Essentially, it's a piece of software that you can use to create a website. Traditionally, WordPress first started as a blogging platform, right? So you would use the software to create your own blog. But in the recent years, it's been updated with all of these new features that make it really good for creating any kind of website, either a blog or a small website or a large website. It doesn't really matter. WordPress can do all of it. WordPress is free, and you can work with it in two ways. You can go to WordPress.com and host your site there, or you can go to WordPress.org and you can download a standalone version of WordPress and install it on your own server and just run the website from there. This is what we'll do. We're going to work locally for this course. And I already went ahead and set up a WordPress website on my local computer. Now, let's see how to work with WordPress themes, right? Because that's the most exciting thing about this platform, is that you can create different themes for the same content, and those themes will display this content in different ways. So here we can see the WordPress site that I just created, and I just populated its database with a lot of content. So you can see how it looks like, but we can go into the admin and we can change the theme. We can go to appearance, themes, and right now we have the theme 2020 active. This is one of the WordPress themes, but I can choose to display or to activate this 2019 theme or this one. So I can activate it. And now if we take a look, you'll see that it looks completely different. The content stays exactly the same, but the appearance of the website has changed. All right, so that's how you basically work with themes. And this is actually what we'll be designing in this course. So we're not actually going to build a theme that we can apply to this website. Instead, we'll be designing it. And I'm going to show you what are the necessary steps for that. Now, what about the structure of a WordPress website, right? We need to know that before we start creating themes for it. Well, let's have a look at this local installation and quickly go through the core structure of this installation. To do that, I'm gonna switch back to the 2020 theme. Okay, and every WordPress website has an index page which displays a list of posts, right? WordPress is kind of centered around these pieces of content called posts. So the index page, which is often the home page, displays a list of posts. Template sticky is one post, hello world is another post, this one, and so on and so forth. So this is one page that we need to design, the index. Then if we open up a post, for example, hello world, we get to a different page. This is called the post page, where we can see the content of a single post. And alongside that, also the conversation around that particular post, because WordPress has a feature that allows you to comment or leave messages on posts and pages. So this is an example of a reply or a message, and here you also have the ability to leave a reply. We have an archive page, and the archive page will basically give you a collection of posts that share the same criteria. For example, if I click the author name here, this is an archive page with all the posts that are written by admin. If I click uncategorized, and by the way, this is a category, this is going to take me to an archive page where all the posts displayed belong to the same category, which is, in this instance, is called uncategorized. I can also search for a specific term, and this will give me an archive for the search results. It will show me all the posts that match my search criteria. All right, so what do we have so far? We have the index page. We have the post page, which displays the post content. We have the archive page. These are the essential pages that we need to design. Also, in WordPress, you can create standalone pages that have nothing to do with posts. For example, here we have a sample page that has just a title and a content. And that's it. All right, so with this quick introduction out of the way, let's start the design process. As I was saying in the previous lesson, we're going to be using a design system approach. And more about that in the next lesson. See you there. Hello and welcome back to the course. Now, as I was saying in the introduction video, for this WordPress theme, we're going to be using a design system approach. What does that mean? Well, instead of designing pages one by one, we're going to create a system with the core components, with some guidelines, some best practices, and then we can reference that system and create as many pages as we want. There are a couple of advantages to using this approach. Number one, everything you create based on a system will be consistent. In our case, all the pages that we're going to build will be consistent because we're using the same components that are already defined in our system. Number two, it's much faster to create pages this way. And number three, design systems are starting to become essential for this type of project. So creating one early is very, very good. For starters, you have the option to update it, or you can update it much easier. And then you also have to think about the team. If you're working in a team, using a design system early is beneficial because your team can get accustomed to the system. They can start learning how to use it much earlier, and that's always a great thing. Now, let's see how we're going to document this whole process, how we'll be designing those pages, and also have a look at what we need to create. For documenting, there are a lot of options, really. The easiest one to use is a simple text editor, right? Everyone has that. Your operating system has that. But if you want something a bit more suitable, you can try a couple of different options. The first one, and this is actually the one that we're going to use, is an app called Notion. And you can find it at notion.so. This is basically a piece of software that allows you to create documents with pages, subpages. You can create templates. You can add a bunch of different elements like tables, images. So it's really easy to create documents this way. And it's actually my preferred way of writing documentation. And for the design system, it works great. Another option you can consider is an app called Coda. You can find it at coda.io. I'm using this as well for slightly different purposes, but it works great. So you can go ahead and check it out. You can also use Dropbox Paper, which is another piece of software for creating documents. And this is also free. It works, it syncs with your Dropbox account, and I use this as well. But for the purposes of this course, I'm going to be using Notion. All right, when it comes to designing this WordPress theme, I had a lot of options, and you do as well. There are so many pieces of software nowadays that do a great job with UI design. There is Figma, and there is also Sketch. There is also Adobe XD. There's InVision Studio. So you can use any of these, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Me personally, and for this course, I will be using Figma. It has some great feature like auto layout that's going to help us tremendously. And because it's browser-based, I don't really care what device I'm working on. So right now, I'm working on a Mac, but I also have a PC, which I use regularly. And I also have another laptop back at home, which is also Mac. So if I ever want to work here at the office, maybe on this Mac, or maybe I'm at the PC and I want to get some things done, or if I'm at home and I want to get things done, I can open this design file from any of these places, which is fantastic. And I just want to make a quick note here. Just because I'm using Figma, it doesn't mean you should be using Figma. You can use Sketch, you can use XD, you can use whatever you want, whatever you feel most comfortable with. You can create the same design files that I will be here using other software. That doesn't really matter. What's different on all of these apps that I mentioned is the workflow, right? You have a slightly different workflow in Figma, you have a different one in Sketch, a different one in XD, and just because Figma works better for me doesn't mean it's going to work better for you. So just choose the platform that you feel most comfortable with and use that. All right, so now we know how to document and design the theme. Now, what is it that we have to create? What's this theme about? Well, for it, and as a demonstration for this course, we're going to take a very simple fictional project brief and build off of that. So it goes something like this. First, I'm in Notion here. I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to call it WordPress theme. And inside this, I'm going to create a new page that is going to be called Project Brief. And the project brief looks something like this. So we'll create a simple WordPress theme that focuses on the basics of blogging. And we also have to make sure that we can adapt the theme later on for a wider range of content. That means more pages, more complex pages. And it also says here that the theme will be similar to the default WordPress themes, the ones that I showed you in the previous lesson. The theme requires us to design 4 pages, but as a demo, we'll only be doing this, the index. And we also have to create some widgets, right? The most commonly used one in WordPress, like recent comments, categories, recent posts, and search. In terms of look and feel, the theme should look modern and have a relatively neutral color scheme. And also the theme should be responsive, which is a given, of course. All right, so that's our brief. We now know what we need to do, and we also have all the tools we need to get started. So let's do just that. We'll begin with one of the foundations of any design language, which is color. That's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. Let's start our design system by defining the colors that we'll be using. So we're going to start right here in Figma, where I've created a new frame called colors. And next, I'm going to draw a quick rectangle. I'm going to make it 200 by 150. Obviously, these steps are optional. I'm just trying to define or to create some cards that will allow me to display all the colors in a neatly organized manner. Okay, so let's duplicate that bit. And this is going to be white. And inside here, I'm going to add some text. Let's call this color. And we'll duplicate this again. And this will be the hex value. Okay, let's apply a little bit of styling to these. All right, now here's the cool part about Figma. You have this feature called auto layout, which will essentially allow you to automate some of the layout creation processes. So for example, here, this created a new frame for me, which contains both of these layers. And I can choose where or how to align them. And I can also specify the orientation. In my case, I want vertical, and I can specify a horizontal, a vertical padding, and also spacing between items. This is just fantastic. So I'm going to go with 30 for horizontal padding, 30 for vertical, although that's a little bit too much. Let's try 15. And also spacing between items, let's try like 5. Okay. And then I'm going to take all of this, do another auto layout using Shift A. So this is going to be vertical. And I'm going to quickly give it a drop shadow. And I'm going to do 20 for blur, 4x for Y, and about 10% opacity. All right. Now with this, I'm going to select my main frame, and I'm going to add auto layout to it as well. I'm going to make it vertical, specify like 90 here, 90 here, and maybe around 30 here. All right. So now the cool thing about Figma is that I can duplicate one of these items, one of these frames, and it's going to maintain the same layout, which is great. Now, I want these colors to be displayed horizontally, so I can select all of these, Shift A to create another frame with auto layout, change the orientation to horizontal, and we're pretty much good to go. So let's talk color. For the main color, or the primary color, I decided to use this blue, which is Pantone's classic blue. It was dubbed the color of the year 2020. So let's quickly grab the color there, and we're going to do it like this. We're going to color it. We're going to color this a rectangle, and we're going to also paste in the hex code right here. And I'm going to call this blue 100. And also make sure that these titles are uppercase, all of them. Let's also add a little bit of padding here. And let's remove the spacing on this main one, on this main frame. This doesn't really matter. If you're using Adobe XD, for example, you don't have these features. So you would have to do these things manually. But since I'm using Figma, it's much easier. Now, based on this color, we're going to create some tints and some shades. Because when working with color and with color palettes, you need one main color, and then you need variations of that color. And variations are basically tints or shades. A tint is a lighter version of that color. A shade is a darker version of that color. And you can easily obtain tints and shades by overlaying a white or a black layer on top of your original color and changing the opacity. Or you can do it the easy way and go to maketintsandshades.com, which is a tint and shade generator. And from there, you just grab the color, click Make Tints and Shades, and then you have the shades here and the tints here. So for this particular example, we're gonna do 2 shades and a few other tints. I believe it's like 8. So the process is actually very simple. Let's do the shades first, copy that, come back here, duplicate this, oops, duplicate this bit, paste the color in there, and paste the color in there. And we're going to call this blue 110. So I'm doing these in increments of 10, just to know that, okay, blue 110 is bigger than blue 100. That means it's the immediate next level of tint or shade or whatever it is that I'm doing. Let's duplicate the process. Let's grab this third one. This is going to be blue 120. Paste in the color and paste in the color. So like that, we have the main color and then 2 shades. Now let's make a bunch of tints. So we're going to grab the first one, paste in the color. We're going to call this blue 90. So we're going down from blue 100. Duplicate, grab the next one. This will be blue 80. See how easy this is in Figma? Duplicate. And we're going to go all the way down to blue 10. Okay, so let's actually do that. So we have blue 90, 80. This will be 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Okay, so now all that's left to do is fill in the rest of these elements. And that's it for the blue. This is our primary color. Now we also need a secondary color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this first row, and where it says here, blue 100, we're going to define our secondary color. And for that, I decided to use something like this, which is kind of a mix between orange and yellow. It's kind of a mustard color. It's DAAC55. It's a relatively complementary color to the blue. So I think it's going to work just fine. So grab that, go ahead and define our tints and shade for it, and just repeat the same process. Grab 2 shades and a whole bunch of tints. And also we're going to rename these. Instead of blue, we'll say orange. Just to keep things simple, in a design system, you should always name your colors. So don't refer to them by their hex code or their RGB code. Instead, give them names. It's much easier to talk about them with other people. Let's grab our second shade here. Okay, and now it's time for the tints. Now, we've defined our primary color and our secondary color. The third step in defining our color palette is to create the grays or the neutral colors. So here's my process for that. What I do is I create a rectangle or whatever shape. Then I fill it with my primary color. I duplicate it and I make sure that the new shape is on top of the old one. I fill that with black, just 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then I just lower the opacity of this to about 80, 75 to 80. So now if you reference that color, you'll see that it's not black anymore. Instead, it's a mix between black and whatever color you chose. Essentially, we're creating a shade for it. Now, alternatively, you can just grab this color, go to this website, and just pick one of the shades from here. So in my case, it would be this one. Okay, so I'm gonna copy that color. Make sure I delete these. I'm gonna duplicate this row and I'm gonna paste it in here. And this will be my base gray color. I'm gonna call this gray 100. And for it, we're gonna create some tints, not shades, because this is the darkest color I will use. So we don't need shades anymore, but we will create some tints. Okay, so let's delete those. Let's sample this color, paste it in here, and I'm going to grab these tints right here. Starting with the first one. It's the same process that we're just repeating. Okay, and this is called gray 90. Next one, gray 80. And the reason I'm also using the hex codes here is that I can export this as an image and someone can print it, right? If they don't have access to the design system right at that time, they can print this sheet and they can see, oh, okay, so these are the colors that I need to define. Pretty cool. And finally, we need to define some contextual or semantic colors. These refer to colors that are specific to certain contexts, like for example, error, success, warning, information. We're going to define 4 of those colors. So let's duplicate this and we can delete a bunch of these elements. First, we have the error, for which we're going to use CB 5940. Then we're going to use this green for success, so 96 CB40. Next, we have this orange for warning. This is CB8B40. And finally, for information, we're going to use this color, 40 AACB. All right, and with that, our colors are defined. Now, what can you do with this in terms of your design system? Well, you have the file here in Figma or whatever software you're using, but you can also document it in Notion, right? So what I usually do is I create a new page called Design System. And then inside that, a new page called Design. So I kind of separate the design from the components. And then inside that, a new page that I call Colors. And inside Colors, I do this. Primary. And then I specify a short description for those colors. Something like this. And then what you can do with Notion is you can create a table. Let's call it primary color variations. And you can have the name of the color. You can have the hex code. And you can have the usage. So where are you using that color? It's very helpful information. So where do you start? Well, you then go back to Figma. You reference your file here. So blue 120, grab the color, paste in the hex code. Blue 110, paste in the hex code. Blue 100, grab the hex code. And so on and so forth. So you do this for the primary, you do this for the secondary colors, and then for the grays, and then for the contextual. It's super, super easy. All right, so that's the color palette. And with it, a huge part of the project is already done because color is just so important. In the next lesson, we're going to tackle another very important aspect of any design language and in particular of our design system, and that is typography. So I'll see you there. Welcome back to the course. In the previous lesson, we defined the colors that we'll be using. Well, now it's time to tackle the typography, right? But before we do that, I just want to make a quick note, and this applies to everything that we'll be doing moving forward. Just because we wrote down those colors in both Figma and Notion, it doesn't mean they're set in stone, that you can't use anything else. You can totally change them. If further down the road you consider that, okay, these colors don't actually work that well for us, it's totally fine. Go ahead and change them. But don't forget to document that change, okay? So update the design system. The thing with design systems is that they evolve with your product. So as your product grows, so does your design system, right? So every time you make a change to your components, your guidelines, make sure you document that change. With that said, let's get cracking with the typography. For typography, I made a quick template here in Figma. We're going to be using a bunch of these frames to display the various typeface styles we'll be using. Here, I just have a display X large set. Here we'll have a preview, and here we'll have some basic information about that style. Now, first things first, we need to figure out the type scale that we're going to use, right? We can't just randomly throw down font sizes and hope everything works. I mean, we can do that, but it's not recommended. Instead, you should use a type or a typographic scale. And a typographic scale is basically looks like this. Every font size is bigger than the one before it by a certain ratio. So for example, if we start with a base font size of 16 pixels, which is this, you'll see that the next one will be 16 times the scale that we choose, or the ratio, which is 1.250. And if we do a quick math here, you'll see that 16 times 1.250 is 20 pixels, which is the next font size. Multiply 20 pixels by 1.250, you'll get 25, which is the next one that you see here. So this is how a scale works. Now, there are a bunch of different scales or ratios to choose from minor second, which looks like this, to golden ratio that looks like this. So these are the two extremes. And the bigger the scale, the more dramatic the difference between each font size. For our project, we're going to stay somewhere in the middle. I usually like to work with perfect fourth because that gives us a nice balance. But because this is a blog, it's highly focused on text, and we have a lot of headings and stuff, I decided to use an augmented fourth scale, which has a ratio of 1.414. And it looks like this. And also we're going to make a quick change here. We're going to change the base font size from 16 to 18 pixels. Now with that information, we can jump back to Figma, and we can set the font size for this first element to 5.653 ems, or 101 pixels. So let's do that, 101. Actually, we'll round it up to 102. So whatever is above 0.5 here will round up. Anything that's below, like for example this one, we'll keep at 25. So that's the font size all done. Let's also change the text here, and let's also change the line height. We're gonna stick with auto and just let Figma do its thing. And we're also gonna add like a fixed size for this box. And once we have that done, we need to set on the font family, right? Or the typefaces that we're going to use. Now, because our brief, if you remember, said that the theme should look modern, in terms of typography, I'm thinking sans serif for the main typefaces. And after looking around, I decided on one of my all-time favorite typefaces, which is Futura PT. PT stands for Paratype, which is the Foundry. This is a geometric typeface. It's a sans serif, and it works beautifully for large text. So this is what we'll be using for all of our headings. For the body text, I'm using yet another sans serif typeface, Lato or Lato. This is from Google Fonts. This you can get from Adobe Fonts. And this is what it looks like. It's a very popular typeface here on Google Fonts. And we're also going to use a serif typeface in the form of PT serif. Again, this is made by Paratype. And this typeface will be used in very select places for captions, for footnotes, stuff like that. So it doesn't have a big role in the whole typography of the project. Instead, it's more of an accent piece, I would say. All right. So with that said, I already have all of these fonts installed on my system. So I'm going to change this to Futura PT. Great. And for the weight, we're going to use heavy, 102, line height set to auto, and then we're good to go. Now all that's left to do is go in here and say font family, just document this here, 102 pixels, line height. You know, for the line height, you can calculate it and just write it down manually, or you can use a ratio, or not a ratio, excuse me, a multiplier. If we go back to type scale, they actually give us some indications here. They are setting the line height to 1.15. Okay. So we can say 1.15 here, which is a multiplier. This gets multiplied with the font size. Okay. So that would give us what? 102 times 1.15. Oops. It will give us 117. And you can put that here, or you can just leave the line height. I'm going to leave the line height just like this. Okay. Next, font weight. We're going to specify heavy. And with that, the very first style is defined. Now, if you've worked with typography before in projects, you might have done the following. create styles for H1, H2, H3, H4, and so on. Lately, I've been avoiding that practice because if I define a style for H1 like this, it doesn't mean that all H1 elements will look like this. I mean, I can have an H1 inside a sidebar, and it's going to be a much smaller font size for that than an H1 displayed in the header or in a hero area. So instead of defining H1, H2, H3, and so on, I do this. Display X large, display large, medium, small, and extra small. This is not my original idea. I've just looked around at other design systems, and this is the way they're doing it. Google Material Design is doing something similar. So I think this approach works better. All right, now let's move on to the next step, which is display large. Oops. Also make sure to update this, and we'll grab the next value, which is 72 pixels. We're still using Futura PT, but for this, we're going to change its weight to medium. And also make sure to update this information card here. Okay, next is going to be display medium, and display medium should be 51. We're going to keep the medium weight, and make sure you update these 51 medium, and we're done. Next, see how easy this is in Figma. I created this template and I just keep repeating it over and over because I have auto layout applied to this white box here. This gets resized automatically according to the amount of text that's inside. So notice how big this frame is. Notice that these are getting smaller and smaller. Okay, this one is for display small. And here we'll be using 36. 36. And we're going to use, for font weight, book. Let's also shrink this text box a little bit. 36 and book. And finally, we have a display extra small, and this will be using 25. And also book. So go ahead and document that. And let's make this even smaller. Okay, next, what else do we need apart from headings? Well, we need a style for the body text, right? So let's create this. And we'll do body 1 here because we're going to have 2 styles for the body. I'm just going to paste in some text here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, and for the typeface, we're going to be using Lotto. It's going to be 18. We're going to use the regular weight. And for line height, we'll go with a 1.5 line height. So 1.5 times 18, you can also do this in Figma, equals to 27. So that's what we'll be using. Update this as well. Lotto 18. You can specify the line height here, either like this, or you can even put a parenthesis there, and font weight regular. Body 2, this will be using our serif font, so PT serif, and I'm creating another style for body 2 just in case we need to make an annotation or a sidebar, something that's like a side note for the main content, and for that we'll be using body 2. Also, we can use this for quotes. So we're going to be using PT serif regular. a slightly smaller font size here, 16. And line height should be 24. And I think we're good to go. So PT serif, 16, 24, and regular. Great. We just have two more elements. This is for caption. And for caption, let's actually do a rectangle here. Let's grab an image. Let's see if I have, yeah, I have this plugin installed here from Unsplash. I'm just gonna insert a picture here. Let's actually make this image a little bit bigger, and we have to redo that. And I'm gonna place my caption. Oops. Right there. And I'm gonna add a 16 pixel distance between the caption and the image. Now the caption will be using PT serif, and we'll go all the way down to the next step in our scale, which is 13. Okay, it's going to be PT serif. We're going to be using italic. And also let's set the opacity. We can actually go back and just reference one of the gray colors. I'm thinking gray 50, so that works great. And finally, let's update this. 13, line height should be what? Maybe like 18. And font weight, regular italic. And finally, the last element that we'll be creating is an overline. And an overline is an element that goes above other more significant elements. And it looks something like that. Let's actually change this bit. And I'm going to say overline here. And we're going to be using Futura PT. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be 13 pixels, uppercase, and we're also going to add a 5% letter spacing. Line height, it can be something like 19, or let's go with 18. Okay, and this is used, for example, in conjunction with other elements, like other headings. So this, for example, could be an article title, and this could be a category. And let's also get it a proper color. And finally, let's update it. 13, 18, update the font family, font weight heavy, and also let's add letter spacing 5%. Great. So with that, our typography is now complete. We've finished everything we had to make in Figma. Now you can jump into Notion. You can go to your design system. Under design, you can create a new page here for typography. And you can start by defining what's the type scale, right? It's an augmented fourth. You can specify the ratio. You can specify the base font size. What else? You can talk about the font sizes, right? You can create a list of sizes with a table, right? So font sizes. Again, you can have a name, you can have a size here, which is text. You can have usage or used for, again, text. So to give you an example, display X large, size 100 and, what was it, 2 pixels, used for hero area headings. Okay, display large. What was the size here? 72 pixels. Used for what? Maybe post title, and so on and so forth. You would have what? Overline, 13 pixels size, used for what? Form labels. And what else? Maybe post categories. Okay, so you document these things. And when you come back next year, for example, because you need to add another page to your website, you can open up the design system and you can take a look at the different font sizes and see, okay, so which size should I use for my form labels? Oh, okay, it's this overline style. That's 13 pixels. Let's go ahead and use that. And then you can go on and document each item individually, just like I did with this one here. Now, obviously, this content that I have here is very crude, and it's really up to you to write it in any way that you see fit. I'm only giving you some pointers here because this course is going to be long, and I don't want to make it super long by documenting every single step. Okay, so I'm just showing you mainly what we're doing in Figma and just some key points of what you can write right here in Notion or whatever software you're using to write the documentation and guidelines for your design system. All right, and with the typography done, it's time to focus on spacing and sizing, and we'll do that in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. So far, we've taken some pretty big steps into defining our design system. We defined our colors and we defined our typography, right? All the typography styles related to this WordPress theme. The next big step is to define our spacing and sizing. And for this, we're going to be using I guess we could call it a grid system or a scale. But this is not like the grid system that you see other people use with the vertical columns to, divide the page into content, sidebar, and so on. This is a slightly different system, and it's based on a value that we're going to use and create increments of it. So let me give you an example. We're going to use an 8-pixel scale. That means that our base value is 8 pixels. Any size or spacing will be based on those 8 pixels and increments of those 8 pixels. So for example, when I'm creating padding, I'm going to use values like 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. Same goes for widths. For example, an image, right? When I'm setting the height of an image, I'm going to make it so that it's an increment of 8. 64, 128, 256, and so on. So why 8 pixels? Well, 8 pixels is divisible by 2, is divisible by 4. And it also works very well with 16 pixels, which is the base font size in pretty much all browsers. So everything that we'll be doing from here on out will be based on this 8-point or 8-pixel scale. Now, there's not much to do in Figma, but instead we're going to jump into Notion and we're going to write some of these things down. So let's create a new page here. We're going to call it spacing and sizing. And we're going to say something like this. So I said the spacing and sizing is based on an 8-pixel scale. So every margin, padding, and size should be based on 8 pixels or increments of it. As an example, a button should have the padding values of 16 pixels top and bottom, 32 pixels left and right. And this is one example. Another example would be that a paragraph will have a bottom margin of 16 pixels. A heading will have a top and bottom margin of 32 pixels. And the examples can go on and on and on. Now, what you can do here as a starting point is to go through your list of patterns or components that you're going to build and lay down some starting values for the things that I just mentioned here: margin, padding, and size. For example, we can say buttons, margin, and we'll be using the CSS notation, which is top left, bottom right. We can say margin top 0, right 0, bottom, let's say 16 pixels, left 0. Padding, we can say top 24, 32, or we can even go 40, again 24 and 40. Now the size here on the buttons doesn't really matter because they will be automatically sized based on the text inside them. What else? Well, let's look at some forms. And for forms, we can target the inputs, right? And we can even make this a second heading. So for this, let's say padding, 24 pixels all around, and then width, let's say 320 pixels. Again, this is divisible by 8. What else? Margin, 0, 0. So margin bottom should be what? 32 pixels, let's say. Then we can have input label. A margin bottom of 16 pixels is usually the best way to go. What else? Well, there are tons of things. Let's do separators, for example. Let's set a height of 4 pixels and let's set padding. Padding doesn't apply here, but margin does. So I'm going to say margin 64 pixels and 0. So 64 top, bottom, 0 left, right. And the list can go on. And notice how pretty much all of these values are based on this 8-pixel scale, right? You don't have to use 8 pixels. You can use 10 pixels. You can use 11 pixels. Whatever makes your job easier. The idea with using a scale is that everything will be consistent. Okay, you won't have a button with 16 pixels padding and a button with 13 pixel padding or with 15 pixels padding, right? Because you know that every measurement you do, every value for padding, margin, width, height needs to be 8 or a multiple of 8. You're going to make sure that everything stays consistent. And because you're documenting things like this, it's much easier to create these components in a consistent manner. So now what you need to do is just go through all of the other patterns or components that you're going to be building, and you need to set these initial values. It doesn't matter if they change once you get to the design part. If those change, then you come back to the system and you update them here as well. But having a place to start like this will just make your job a lot easier. So the foundations of our design systems are now done. We have the colors, typography, sizing, and spacing. With this, we can now start designing our components, and we'll start in the next lesson with the buttons. See you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to design the first patterns in our design system, and we're going to start with something very simple, the buttons. Let's begin. I'm going to start by creating a new page here in Figma, and I'm going to call it Basic Patterns. Now I'm going to copy one of these frames, and I'm going to adapt it. I'm going to call this Button Styles Default. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to say default buttons because we will have two styles, a default and a bordered. And instead of this text, we're going to create our buttons. All right. So we're going to start with a frame, and we're going to give it a fill. And for the fill, we'll choose the blue 100, which is this. Okay. I'm going to give it a slight round over on the corners, 4 pixels there. And I'm going to create an auto layout for it. It's going to be horizontal, 40 pixels of horizontal padding, 24 top and bottom, and let's say 8 distance between items. And just quickly, let's check our spacing and sizing we defined here to see if we got it right. So let's see, we have 24, 24 on top and bottom, 40 lateral, just like we did here. Cool. Now it's time for the text. So let's grab some text. This style is for the enabled button, and we're going to use Futura, medium. The text color is going to be white. Font size is going to be 18. And we should be good to go. That's our first button. So we're going to create a couple of different states for these buttons. The first one is enabled, and we'll also do states for focused, hover, active, or pressed, and disabled. So let's select this frame. Let's duplicate it. And this is going to be focused. For focused, we're going to grab a slightly lighter shade, a tint, sorry, like blue 80. The rest will remain exactly the same. For hover, we're going to have the same style. For pressed or active, we're actually going to grab this shade, blue 120, like that. And we're also going to reduce the padding here a little bit by 1 pixel on each side. So the button will like shrink just a little bit, and we'll say 38 here, 22 here, and that should stay the same. Let's align this in the middle. And finally, let's do the disabled style. For this, we're going to use a very light tint of our primary, like blue 20. So let's grab that, paste that in, and we also have to change the color of the text. So for this, we're actually going to grab the main gray. We'll paste that in, and we'll reduce its opacity to about 50%. Should do the trick. Nice. Or you can go directly to gray 50, select that color, and paste it in like that. That also works. Now, it's important with text that you get color accessibility right, meaning you need to have enough contrast between the text and its background to create a good experience even for people with visual impairments. So there are lots of ways to do that. There are online contrast checkers that will tell you if you're passing the minimum requirements. Personally, I use a Mac app that's called Contrast. It's a free app. It sits in your toolbar on the top. I'm afraid you can't see it right now, but basically you just reference or sample the background color. You sample the text color, and it's going to give you the contrast. In my case, it's 2.58, which is a fail. You need to have at least 3. So we need to bump this up a little bit, and let's go with a gray 60. Okay, so with gray 60, I'm going to do this test yet again. And now I have a contrast of 3.63, which is a pass. So that's the color that I'm going to use. Okay, I mentioned we're going to create 2 styles for the buttons. This is the default, and let's also create a bordered style. These will serve as like complementary styles. Mainly, we will be using these, like the full buttons, but there are cases when we need an additional style. So that's why we're going to create bordered buttons. Okay, so we're going to change things up here. Instead of the fill being this color, we're going to change the fill to white, and we're going to add a 1 pixel stroke with that color, and we'll also change the text color. Okay, this is the same, white, stroke, and change the text color. And let's quickly make sure that this is passing our color test. And it does. We have a contrast of 5.36, so that's great. Hover is exactly the same thing, so let's actually make our jobs a little easier. Pressed, same deal, just different color. And disabled, grab this, add stroke, change the background, and I'm actually going to keep this this fill color. And just for the sake of it, let's also check this with our contrast tool. And we are passing. We have a contrast of 5, a contrast ratio of 5. Cool. So those are the bordered buttons. Now, we can have different colors for the buttons, right? We have our primaries, but if you remember from the previous lessons, we also have a secondary color and a gray color set, right? So we need to create buttons for these as well. We might not use them, but just in case we do need them, they're good to have. Now, let's duplicate this bit. I'm gonna call this button colors. So this is primary, secondary, tertiary. And let's group all of these, and let's create the filled versions for each. And actually, I think I'm simply going to copy one from here. Delete that. And this will be primary, secondary, and tertiary. All right. So primary, the colors here are okay. For secondary, let's go and grab our orange 100. And we'll use that here. And for text, obviously this won't pass the contrast check. So let's go with gray 100. That's going to pass for sure. And for tertiary, We'll also use gray 100 with white. And now to do the secondary button style, we can't actually use orange 100 against white because it doesn't pass the contrast test. Okay, and just as a quick test, yeah, it fails. It has a contrast ratio of 2.12. And sorry you can't see this contrast tool I'm using. I'll put a quick video right now showing you how to use it and what kind of results it gets you. So instead of using orange 100, we're going to use a shade of it, orange 120. See where this color palette comes in handy? You can quickly reference it to build this. So again, let's quickly check the contrast. And we have a contrast ratio of 3.23. So we are okay. Finally, let's change the color here and the color here, and that is the tertiary, let's call it ghost button style. Finally, we need to create some button sizes. So button sizes, let's duplicate this bit. We're going to have 3 sizes. So this is medium, but we're going to have large and we're going to have small. All right. So for medium, the properties are already set. For small, I'm going to change the font size to 16. Font weight stays the same at medium. And then I'm going to change the padding a little bit. I'm going to use 32 horizontally and 16 vertically. Align all of these properly. And then for large, I'm going to change the horizontal padding to 56, 32 for vertical, and also the text is going to be 25. All right, and that's it. These are the buttons. So we have 2 styles, the default, which are full buttons or filled buttons, bordered, which look like those ghost buttons. I was gonna say busters. Ghost buttons that you see being used all over the web. Then we have some different colors that we can choose from, but mainly we will be using the primary. And then we have 3 button sizes, large, medium, small. All right, now, in terms of your design system, like your documentation, what do you need to write here? Well, let's go back here under design system. We're going to create a new page called, called basic patterns. And under basic patterns, you'll then create another page that you will call buttons. So on buttons, you can document things like button styles, and you would have default, and then you'd say the characteristics of default buttons. So what are those? Fill color, border, padding, etc. And then you would have the bordered, again, characteristics. Then you would have button colors. And here you have primary, secondary, tertiary. And on each one, what do you use it for? Used for primary actions like form submit, read more, etc. Secondary button. What do you use these for? Well, secondary actions. Like maybe if you have a homepage and a hero area with a call to action, right? And you have a primary button, and then you have another button that's maybe the primary button takes you someplace to a buy. The secondary button takes you to a free trial. So you have two separate actions, but the main one uses the primary button. The second one, or the secondary one, uses this. Okay, tertiary, and the list can go on and on. And then you have button sizes. Again, large, and you would set some characteristics. Medium, small. What do you use this for? And the list can go on and on and on. This is the type of documentation that you need to write. You need to be pretty specific about, okay, this button is for this type of content, right? And you need to think about these ahead. So the buttons are now done, and you can see just how easy it is to build some stuff once you have all the guidelines in place. We simply referenced some colors, some sizing information from our design system, and we created the buttons. Next, we're going to create the form elements. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In the previous lesson, we created the first patterns in our design system, the buttons. In this lesson, we're going to move on and create the forms. And forms are very common patterns in UI design. And WordPress actually has a few built-in ones that we can use right away. So nailing these in our design system is very important. So let's begin. Let's create a new page here called Basic Patterns Forms. I'm going to paste in this frame, and we're going to start with forms inline. Let's delete some of these buttons. So inline forms, what are these? And how are they different from normal forms? Well, inline forms basically means a form that's on a single line, while block forms are the ones that you see with inputs one above the other and with usually a submit button on the very bottom. But these usually have one input, another input, and a button. Very common for like a login form or a search form. So for our example here, we're going to create a search form. Inside this frame, let's create a rectangle, and I'm going to create a frame out of it. And this frame, let's fill it with white. Let's give it a stroke, 1 pixel, and we're going to get our gray 10 color. That should do it. Let's give it 4 pixel corner radius to match our buttons. And we're going to give it an auto layout, vertical. We're going to give it a fixed width. And let's see if we have anything written down for form elements. Okay, here we go. So forms inputs, we have a 24 pixel padding, 320 pixel width. So that's what we'll use. 320 and 24, 24. And let's give it an 8 pixel. This is the distance between items, or spacing between items. If you have multiple items in the same frame, they will be spaced apart with 8 pixel in between them. All right, let's create some text in here. We're going to say enter your search term. We're going to use the body typeface for this, which is Lato. And we're going to make it an italic because this is a placeholder. So Lato italic 18. And for the fill, let's go with a nice gray, gray 50. That should do the trick. Nice. And let's make sure that we have a nice distance between these two elements, like 16. Okay. Let's align these vertically like this. Cool. The only thing left to do here is to add an icon. We can add a nice little search icon. Now, for the icons, I have an app here on my Mac called Icon Jar. And this allows me to import a set of icons from the web and like have my own personal collection. And with my collections all loaded up, I can browse them. I can see these nice previews of the icons, and I can simply right click, I can copy, or I can export these icons. Okay, so the set that we're going to use is Zond Icons by Steve Shoger. This is a free icon set. You can find it at zondicons.com. You can also see the full set here. It's a nice little set, but obviously you can use whatever icons you want. So I've already downloaded the icon, and I'm simply gonna drag it in, and I'm gonna move it, oops, right there in this frame. I'm gonna change this from vertical to horizontal, and I'm gonna change the order of the items. I'm gonna make sure everything is aligned in the middle like this. And I'm gonna make sure that my frame has a distance between items of 16 pixels. So I have 16 between the icon and my text. Okay. And finally, the last thing to do here is to grab a nice gray color. Gray 80 is what I'm probably gonna use for the text anyway, and change the color of that icon. And just like that, we've created our first inline form. And this is a search form. Next, let's move on to the block forms. So let's duplicate this, forms, block. Okay, for this, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Let's delete some of these items. And we'll keep the input, but we'll add a label to it. And for the label, we're actually going to grab this overline. Okay, let's change the frame layout. Oops. From horizontal to vertical, and make sure that we have the proper spacing between these two items. We'll need to group them up and create yet another frame, and we'll set 16 pixels spacing between these items. Now, this one is going to be for the name, and also let's change the color. Nice. And this, let's make it vertical again. Let's create a fixed width, 320. And let's align this text to the left. Okay, so now we have one frame with our input and label. Let's duplicate this 2 times. 1, 2. Let's select the parent frame and select 32 pixel distance between these items. This will be for, let's say, an email address. This will be for a subject. And then let's also create a text area for a message. And for this one, we're going to double the width, so 640. And also for the height, and actually we don't need an auto layout here, so let's delete that and select 240 for the height. Okay, and finally let's add a button. Let's add one of these default buttons like that says send message or post comment or whatever it is. We'll consider this to be a contact form. So that is our block form. Now, there are two more things we need to do for our forms. We need to create input states. So what happens when one of the inputs is in a state of error or validation. And also, we need to create some styles for focused, hover, or disabled inputs. So let's go ahead and do that right now. First, I'm going to say forms, input states. Let's delete these. And here, we're going to say error, success, and let's do one for warning as well. All right, for error, let's say that I want to introduce, or I'm typing an incorrect email address like johnsmith@gmail.co, right? This is invalid. Here, let's say that I just put in John Smith, not John input. And for warning, well, we can just type in like, I have a password. Okay. Let's also change the color of these because this will be like regular text. Good. And then, because this is an error, we're going to grab the color for error, and we're going to use it as a stroke. Good. And let's also grab ourselves a caption, and we're going to say error. Email address is incorrect. And we're also going to use that color for the text. For success, let's use this color. And we're good to go. For warning, we're going to use this color. Oops. And also, let's add that helper text telling us that, hey, you have a warning. Password could be vulnerable. All right, the final thing to do here is to add some icons. So on the error, let's search for a nice icon, looking something with an X, there we go, close outline. So we're going to use this one. And let's see if I can find it here in my Finder window. There we go. Let's drop that in. And let's paste it right here. And to align these properly, I'm just going to create another frame, just like that. And I got to make sure that the size of my icon is a multiple of 8 because we are using that 8-pixel system. Right now it's 20. So let's use 16. And let's also use the correct color for it. And let's do one for warning here. And we're going to be using this one. Again, let's change its size, 16. And let's change its color as well. Cool. And what else? Only one thing left to do here, just change the alignment. Just like that. And we're good to go. These are the input states. We have one for error, one for success, and one for warning. The last thing to do is create some input styles for focused, hover, and disabled. For that, let's duplicate this form. We're going to call this input styles and delete some of these things. This will be default. Let's duplicate it. Let's also do an input value and what it's going to look like. Lotto regular 18. Make sure you input the correct color. Let's also do one for focused. Here, I'm just basically going to change the border color to a nice gray 70, like that. We have one for hover, which is essentially the same thing, but we're gonna take advantage of this and define a placeholder. This is Lotto Italic, 18 pixels with a lighter shade of gray. And finally, disabled. This one uses gray 10 for both fill and stroke, and the input text is the same color as the placeholder. And that's it. We now have styles for the inline form, the block form, and then we have different states for error, success, warning, and then styles for focus, hover, disabled, and of course the default. All that's left to do now is go in here under Design System, Basic Patterns, create a new page, Forms, and then you would start documenting what we just did in Figma, right? Things like, what's the spacing between this element here and this button here? It's 16, write it down. What's the spacing between this icon and the text next to it? That's 16, write it down. On the block forms, what's the distance between two groups of inputs? That's 32, write it down, and so on and so forth. How should the input states look like? Well, the border is red, green, orange. The icon is this for error, is this for warning, and they get the same colors as their input. You also add a helper text. Then you go to input styles. How does the focus look like? The hover, the disabled. You need to document all of these. As I was saying previously, just to keep this course as short as possible, I'm just going to tell you what to do and leave it up to you. All right, forms are now done, so we are ready to move on. In the next lesson, we'll be designing the menus. So I'll see you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we'll be designing our navigation menus, and these are or represent another very popular pattern in UI design. And WordPress actually has a feature for quickly defining these menus. So having these in our design system is very important. Let's begin. We start in Figma, where we'll create a new page called Basic Patterns Menus. And let's quickly grab one of these frames. And let's do a drop-down menu. This will be the main navigation menu. Let's start with a piece of text. It says home. We'll be using Futura, medium, 18 pixels. And for the color, let's go with something like a gray 80 or a gray 70. Paste that in. Okay, let's create a new frame for this. And let's add 0, 0, 32 pixel spacing between items. So now we can just do this as much as we want. So let's create the other menu items. Obviously, these are just some placeholder items, and that should be enough. Cool. Now, photo and video will actually be a drop-down menu. So we got to put a little chevron arrow. And I'm going to use this chevron down that I have from our icon set. And what I'm going to do is group these two up and create a frame with auto layout. And make sure I set 16 pixels of spacing between the two. And actually, I think we need to go half that value, 8 pixels. Let's also target this chevron down and change its size to 16 pixels. And make sure it's aligned in the middle, and it's aligned in the middle. Perfect. And finally, let's change the color of the icon as well. Now we need to specify a style for hover and active. So I'm going to start by sampling our gray 100. So let's say that design and illustration is the active page. We're going to give it a darker color. And we're also going to add a small line underneath, like an indicator. So let's grab the rectangle tool and let's have this as one group so I can, freely move this around like that. I'm going to place this at 8 pixels and I'm going to make it 4. Sorry, I meant to do this. And let's do 2 for height. That should do the trick. And also use the same color as before. Okay, let's move this further down a little bit to 16 pixels from the text. All right, that looks pretty good. And finally, let's style the drop-down menu. Let's duplicate this and put it under photo and video. Let's also change the color of this. And this will represent an active drop-down menu. All right. Now, below this, let's create a rectangle. And I'm actually going to make a frame out of it by adding auto layout. And for this frame, I'm going to choose 24 pixels padding, top and bottom, and 16 pixels of distance between elements. And I'm going to add a drop shadow, 20 blur, 4x, 4y, black, 10%. And let's put some text inside. And let's also add a fill color because the shadow wasn't showing up. There we go. For this text, we're going to change things up a little bit. We're going to get a lighter color like a gray 70. And we're going to use book and 16 pixels for font size. Okay. And this is a vertical frame. Good. Let's duplicate these. And let's say we have some extra categories like editing, inspiration, and I don't know, Adobe Premiere Pro. All right, now let's move this whole thing 24 pixels to the left. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now the text inside matches my text here. And let's also do a hover state for one of these items. We're going to use orange 100. Or let's actually go with 120 because of the contrast I mentioned earlier. And there you go. That's how our drop-down menus should look like. And finally, we have to create a footer menu. So a menu that goes, you guessed it, in the footer. This is much simpler. We don't have these. We don't... Oops. Oh no, I broke it. We don't have this. We don't have this. And we don't have this. Instead, we just have these items. And let's also use this color for all of them. Okay. And now we'll select all. We'll change this to Futura PT Heavy. We'll essentially be using the overline properties that we have here. So we're going to be using this style, except a different color. So Fedora PT heavy, let's make this uppercase. And what else? We need a little bit of letter spacing. 5% should do the trick. And let's see what kind of spacing we have here. Let's ungroup this. And we have 32. Let's go a bit lower, maybe like 24. And to get the hover state, let's exemplify using this link here. So when you hover on one of these links in the footer menu, the link changes its color to this. How cool is that? Okay. And those are the two menus that we'll be using. The drop-down, which is the main menu, it goes in the header, and the footer menu, which we'll find a place for it in the footer. All right, and that's it for this lesson. Our design system is really starting to take shape, and that's fantastic. Let's continue. In the next lesson, we'll cover icons and images. So, see you there. Welcome back to the course. Let's continue building our WordPress theme design system by documenting how we're gonna use icons and images. Let's begin. As per usual, we're gonna start with a new page. We're gonna call it Basic Patterns, Icons and Images. Let me just copy one of these frames to make things easier for us. And we'll start with icons utility. So for this theme, I'm breaking down the icons in two types. One is utility and two is decorative. Utility refers to icons that are used in very specific contexts, like a search icon or one of those loop icons being used in a search form, or the chevron down icon that you saw me use in the drop-down menu, okay? Or the contextual icons that I used in the form design with the X for error, check mark for valid, or actually I didn't use a check mark, or the exclamation mark for warning, right? Those are the types of icons that I consider to be utility icons. Decorative icons, on the other hand, have, well, decorative role, right? They're meant to be used alongside text, you know, to create like a feature or a walkthrough, stuff like that. This is a very common practice in web design, right? You have 3 columns of content, an icon on top, a title, and a small description, and possibly a link or a button, right? Those are the types of icons that I consider to be decorative, okay? So we're gonna start here with utility icons. Let's delete that, and let's delete that, and let's delete that. And inside, well, we're just gonna put all the icons that we're gonna use or plan on using in this project. And of course, the list will grow over time, but at the end, you'll have a clear list of, oh, okay, so here are all the icons that I used in this project, and I can just export these as SVG, and don't worry about it. You know, I won't have to load an entire icon library just to use these 5 or 10 icons. So it's always a good thing to have. So now we're gonna, excuse me, we're gonna go through the list here, and we're gonna grab the ones that we're using, paste them in. What else? We have these 2. So copy that, paste that in, copy that, paste it in. And what else? We have one on menus here. Copy it, paste it. And we have some other ones. We're gonna grab the reverse of this, which actually will just duplicate and will rotate by flipping it. And then we'll grab a new one. We'll paste that in. And what else? I think we got all of them, right? Let's also do a check mark. You never know how you're gonna need that. And let's grab a menu icon. And by the way, these are all from the same set. They're all from here, Zond icons. And I think we're done with utility icons. As I was saying, if we're gonna have more, then we're gonna add more. So just to clear things up a little bit, let's make sure all of these are have the same characteristics, which means 16 pixels size. And actually, because I had to make that change, it means that on the forms side, I actually didn't size this correctly, did I? Nope, I forgot. Excuse me. I'm sorry. There you go. There you go. Now that's cool. So let's also change the color of these. And let's change the color of this. I love Figma. It's so easy to work with. So that's 16, 16, 16. This needs to be fixed. 16. Let's align it like that. And let's change the color. 16. Align it in the middle. Change color. Same goes for this. 16, middle, color. And we're done. Just for the sake of it, let's add a little bit more spacing between these. Yep, that looks pretty good. So now we're done with utility icons. Let's duplicate this and create some decorative icons. Now, another difference between utility and decorative is that these utility icons, they have the same size pretty much all the time, 16 pixels, but decorative ones, we'll make them in 3 sizes, small, medium, large, just because at some points we might want a small icon, but other times we might want a large icon. So it's good to have these in your system. It makes your job easier in the long run. So we're going to say icons decorative small, and I'm actually going to remove all of these. And I'm just going to grab some new ones. And I'm going to use another set. It's these icons, a free icon set from Theme Isle. They're pretty nice. They're outline icons. I really like this style. So I went ahead and downloaded a couple from here. They're just for demonstration purposes. You should tailor these icons to your content because they're decorative, right? They must fit with whatever other content you're associating them with. So I grabbed a couple and I'm just going to bring them in here. Let's actually change their size to 32 each. And let's also grab our color and apply it to all of them. Cool. The next size is medium. And for these, we'll actually double their size. We'll make them 64. And we'll also add a bit more spacing between them. This is just for show, really. And finally, let's make the large ones. And these will be 128. And let's also change the spacing between them to like 72. Finally, let's look at images. And for images, we're just going to use a demo image in here. And we got to make sure that the height is a multiple of 8. So 560 divided by 8 gives us 70. So this is a correct height. And again, this is just for demonstration. We can show the proper height and also the style of the image, right? We're going to keep it really simple. We won't be rounding off any corners on this one, and we're not going to add any shadows or borders or stuff like that. So let's actually grab an image from Unsplash. That should do the trick. And yeah, I think we're pretty much done in Figma. Now, the next thing you have to do is go into your text editor here, add a new page for icons and images, and you can write content like this. I just quickly filled this out so I can give you an example of what you can write in this document. So I said there are two types of icons, utility and decorative. So what are utility icons? I give an example, I show an image, I set a caption for this, and then I talk about sizes. So utility icons have a size of 16 by 16. If you don't have a square icon, then set the height to 16 pixels. The decorative icons, what are they used for? What are their sizes? Small, medium, large. And again, I'm using the theme aisle free icon pack that's found here. And then we have images, some information. Wherever possible, images for the post and page cover should have a ratio of 16 by 9. And also they should be sized in multiples of 8. Square images should have both dimensions in multiples of 8. And so on and so forth. And since I'm here, and because we're dealing with these links to various resources we're using, we're going to go back to WordPress theme here to the root document. I'm going to create a new page, and I'm going to call this resources. Right? So for icons, we're actually using this link here. And in Notion, at least, you can create a bookmark or an embed. But I usually just go for bookmark, and it gives you this styled link with a preview taken directly from the website, which is, just fantastic. And that's how we're going to use icons and images. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to design and document a pattern that a lot of people think it's outdated, but that's not true. Tables are still being used in WordPress. Even for a widget, the calendar widget, that still uses table markup. But for tabular data, they're still the best pattern to use. So in the next lesson, we're going to cover tables. See you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to design tables. And you might think that tables are obsolete by now, but that's not true. WordPress still uses table markup for some of its default widgets, and tables are still the best way to display tabular data. So it's important that we include them in our design system. So let's go. Back in Figma, we'll do the usual thing, basic patterns, tables, and let's just copy one of these frames, rename it, tables, tables. Let's delete that image and let's start with a rectangle. And this rectangle will actually be deleted. And we're going to create a frame instead, just like that. So we can add auto layout to it. We're going to make it vertical. We're going to give it a fixed width of, let's say, 160. And as for the padding, let's go with 32, 16 vertically, and we can leave this to 0. Or let's put 8. Now, let's fill this with a nice gray color. Let's choose gray 80. Okay, great. And now let's put some text inside. Like, for example, name. Let's align this to the left. Let's make it white. And we're going to use Futura PT. Heavy, I believe it was, but let's reference that. We're going to use the overline characteristics. So Futura 13, heavy, 5% letter spacing. 13 pixels, 5%. Fill is white. Okay, great. So this is a table header, if you're wondering. And we're going to duplicate it. And then we're going to come back to this frame. And we're going to say distance between items, 1 pixel. So we get this nice separator here in between. This can be used for an email address. And let's actually make this a lot bigger, 280. Let's duplicate that and use it for, I don't know, a registration date, for instance. Let's make this 240. So now, because we have this group of table headers, let's group them all up in another frame and let's duplicate it. And now we're going to go to the parent frame and switch this to vertical. Okay, so what we can do now is change these to this gray 10, change the color of the text to this, and also we're going to change from Futura to Lato, which is the body typeface, regular, 16 pixels, 0 for letter spacing, and let's also change the case to this. And let's do another one where all of these are white. So now we can grab these, duplicate them, and we have our table. Now all that's left to do is just grab some names. I have a plugin here called Content Reel. This is made by Microsoft. And I can select multiple text layers. And I can do names. I can select these. I can do email addresses. And I can select these and I can do dates. Actually, I don't want the time, just the dates. Cool. So now we have a table that's populated with some text and it's ready to go. The last thing you have to do is go into your design system here, basic patterns, create a new page, tables. What do you use it for? These are used for tabular data. Do not, and let's do this, do not use tables for layout. We have much better options for that. And then you can go into details like table headers, right? What kind of style do you have here? Table rows. So let's put in style, meaning, background color, text color, padding, etc. Table rows. You need to do the same thing. You can also show some examples here, make some screenshots from Figma, bring them over to whatever software you're using to create these documents, right? Have examples, have use cases. those are things that should go into a design system. All right, and the tables are done. Now, another very useful component in any UI is a separator, and we'll design and document that alongside spacers in the next lesson. See you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to design and document separators and spacers. And these might look like minor elements, but they can prove to be quite useful. So let's begin. We'll start in Figma, as per usual, basic patterns. We'll call this separators. And we have quite an easy task. Let's delete some of this content. Let's actually grab some text content from here, just as a demo. Let's create the actual separator, and this will be using the gray 80 color. So make sure you update the fill. Height, we're going to use 4 pixels. And for width, let's go with like 320, maybe a bit more, like 400. But the idea is this type of separators spans the entire available horizontal space. And then let's duplicate this one more. And now we're going to grab this. We're going to put it in its own frame with an auto layout. We're going to set this to vertical. Side margins 0, and top and bottom we're gonna set these to 64 and 0 there. Okay, and I forgot to update separator default. Let's do one more. Let's do a small separator. Again, we might not use this, but it's always good to have. So for the small separator, we're gonna make it very thin, like 1 pixel. We're gonna give it a smaller width, like 240. Notice how this is also a multiple of 8. And for color, let's go with maybe gray 20. That should do the trick. Cool. And this is also going to have 64 pixels of padding top and bottom. All right, and this is how these two separators look like. So now to document this, we'll basically go back here, add a new page, which we're gonna call Separators and Spacers. And then you can say something like this. There are 2 types. So we have the large or default and small. The separators have a margin of 64 pixels on both top and bottom. Now, I said margin here because I'm referring to the CSS that we're going to eventually write. But in Figma, this is padding because it's inside a frame. I'm saying the large separator has a height of 4 pixels. And it goes all the available horizontal space. And the small separator is a 1 pixel in height and 240 in width. And I believe that's how we made it, right? 240. Yep. Okay. You can also add information about color here. So like the large separator uses this color, the small separator uses the other color. And you can also include screenshots right here. Now, for spacers, what are spacers? Well, they're just blank elements that you can use between 2 elements to create white space, right? And we can create like a lot of vertical spacers. And the main idea is to have their heights created in increments of 8 pixels, right? And we can make a quick table here. And we can say spacer sizes, and we're going to have the size, and then the height. And you can go like this: 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x. And then for the height, you go 8 pixels, 16, 24, 32, 40. And then you can go into each one and make it look like a piece of code to get that highlight. And you can go all the way down to like 10x. You can create as many spacers as you need. And when you're in the design stage and you need a spacer between the two items, right? You just come back to Notion or whatever you're using to edit your document. You go to Spacers, to Separators and Spacers, and you see the available sizes. And you can see that, oh, okay, I can use a 5x spacer that will give me 40 pixels of vertical space. So you just grab that from there. It's really, really easy this way. All right, we're almost done with the basic patterns in our design system. There's only one element left to document, and that is the grid system that we're going to be using. That's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. When creating a user interface, especially for a web project, having a grid system is essential. And this is where I talk about grid systems with like vertical columns. This makes your job of creating layouts so much easier. And while we can't design a grid system, we can certainly document one. So let's do that both in Figma and in Notion here. So in Figma, I went ahead and got a head start. I created a new page for our grid system here, created this frame. I took out the auto layout on this bit because in Figma, we can add a layout grid. So let's do that. And we can choose between grid, columns, and rows. We're going to choose columns. But before we do that, let's go ahead and change the width of this to 1200 pixels by, I don't know, 800. It doesn't matter. The height doesn't matter. The width is what's important, because 1200 pixels usually means a desktop size. Okay. So back here, we're going to use a 12 column grid. Color is not important. Type, we're going to use stretch. The column width will be set to auto, but we will add 24 pixels of margin, 24 pixel gutter. This creates a gap on both sides of 24 pixels, and the gutter is the distance between columns. Again, 24 pixels. If you were to set this to center, you would need to manually set the width of your columns, just like this. But we're going to leave it on stretch, and we're just going to check these measurements. So 24 margin, 24 gutter, 12 columns. So what you can do with this grid is you can align things to it, right? Let's say this will be on 4 columns. This will be on another 4 columns, and this will be on another 4 columns. That's pretty neat. Okay. And then you can grab a screenshot of this and move it over to Notion. Now, because we're not just designing for desktop, we need to create some grids for tablets and phones, right? So let's go ahead and duplicate this. This will be tablet. And let's change the size here to 600, the width, I mean. And let's go ahead and change our layout from 12 to 6. So on tablet, we're going to be using 6 columns instead of 12, but we're going to have the exact same numbers here, 24 margin, 24 gutter. So now your content, you can even demonstrate that here, can go like this, or it can go like half-half. So 3 columns and 3 columns, and then maybe 1 or 6 columns. So you'd have 50, 50, 100%. So that's one way you can do things. For the phone, let's change this to 480. And for the layout, we're going to use 2 columns, but with the same characteristics, 24 margin, 24 gutter. And then your content, you know, it might look something like this, right? Or you can do everything like so, right? It's really up to you. But having this visual aid can really help you. And if you insist, you can also change the color here from red to something else. Let's make this green. Right, so you have different colors for different devices, desktop, tablet, phone. Now, in terms of written documentation, well, you can go to Design System, Basic Patterns, create a new page here, call it Grid System, and inside you can put stuff like this. How many columns are you using? You give out some examples of what kind of content, or you can put in those layouts like 8 columns plus 4, 4 plus 4 plus 4, 6 plus 6, 1 plus 11, and so on. You specify the properties, what gutter, what margin, column width, what exactly are you using? And then how many columns are you using for desktop? How many for tablet? How many for phone? What are the breakpoints that you're using? So desktop, 1200 and up, tablet between 600 and 1199, phone under 599. And as I was saying, you can make screenshots of this and load those screenshots into Notion here. So now that we've designed and documented these basic patterns, we can start working on some more advanced ones. We'll do that in the next lesson, and we'll start with WordPress widgets. See you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're starting to create some of the more advanced patterns for our design system, and we'll kick things off with some of the most popular WordPress widgets. So let's begin. In Figma, I created another page, another frame, and we're ready to start. Now, if you remember from our project brief, the widgets that we need to create are recent comments, categories, recent posts, and search. So let's start with recent comments. Every widget in WordPress, let me just start with this. Every widget has a title and it has content. And the content is different from widget to widget. You can have maybe a list, you can have text, you can have a calendar, you can have a form. So it depends. But pretty much all the widgets have a title. So let's start with that. We'll go back to our typography. And let's see, we'll choose let's see, display medium. This is 51 pixels. It's pretty high. It's pretty big for a title. So we're going to choose between display small and display extra small. This, I believe, is a bit too small. So I think this one will do the trick nicely. So display small is the one that we're going to use. So grab that, paste it in. Let's say recent comments. And then in WordPress, if we take a look at our local installation here, and we'll scroll all the way down to the widgets, you'll see that recent comments looks like this. So we have the title, and then we basically have a list, where every list item has a link to the comment author, the word on, and then another link to the actual post where they commented. So that's what we'll do as well. Recent comments, then we'll duplicate this. We'll use the body text, Lotto, regular, 18. Let's get the colors right. We're going to use gray 80 for both of these. And perhaps actually on the headings, excuse me, we're going to use a darker color. We're going to use gray 100. Also, let's add 32 pixels space between these two. And then we're going to have something like this. I'm just going to paste in some random data here. And this will turn into a link. So I'm going to use bold. And this as well. And also we're going to change their color. We're going to use orange 120. Cool. So now let's group this up, create a vertical auto layout, 0 here, 16 pixels between, 0 here and 16 pixels between items. So now I can just duplicate this and just update it with new content. Okay, make sure you align this to the left, and let's replace the on word. This is going to be a regular, and it's going to have this color. All right, and that's the first widget, recent comments. Next is categories. So let's duplicate this. Also change the title here. And if we look back in WordPress, you'll see that categories is just a list of links to the various categories. So we're going to do that here as well, and just change the layout accordingly, like that. Next is recent posts, and recent posts is also a list of links. So let's update the content there, make sure this is aligned to the left. And finally, we need a widget for search. Now for this search widget, we're going to grab our search form that we created earlier. And actually, let's don't forget to change the text in the button here. So copy that. Let's actually group it up. And let's paste it in. This actually should be horizontal, 16 pixels in between. Okay, and we're good to go. That's how these 4 widgets will look like. See how easy it is to create this once you have all the information written down and documented? Super simple. Now for the project or for the written documentation, let's go to Design System. Let's create another page here called Advanced Patterns. Create another page called WordPress Widgets. And in here, you can put things like what widgets are documented in the system. You can say that each widget has a title with the properties of display small, which is also documented, how much space there is between the title and the widget content, and then any link that's in the widget is bold, and the color, is orange 120. And where you have lists, list items have a 16 pixel distance between them. All right, so we've designed and documented some of the most popular widgets in WordPress. Next, we need to design and document a WordPress post. Right? This is a big one, so we're going to cover that in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. Now, WordPress is a blogging platform, right? And every blog is made up of a series of posts. So let's go ahead and design and document one of these posts for our design system. Let's begin. We start in Figma, where I've created this parent frame that has a little bit of padding on the sides. And then inside, I have a smaller frame that's 1200 pixels, because we're going to design this for desktop right now. And to which we're going to apply a column layout. 12 columns, stretch 24, 24. And I'm also going to change the opacity of this to 5% and maybe choose a slightly different color, something like that. All right, let's start from the beginning. Each post has a title. That's where we start. A title and some meta information. And meta information refers to the author, published date, number of comments, and also the category that it belongs to. Now, for the category and title, we can actually use this overline that we documented here. So the category is going to be here, and the title is going to be here. So let's copy this, paste it in, and let's copy a title. I think I'll go with display large, because extra large seems too much for a post title. I added this to the design system just in case we're creating like a hero area and we need a really big title. But for our purpose, a display large style is exactly what we need. So let's paste that in. Let's align these two to the grid, and let's move these at like 64 pixels from the top. And then with these, I'm gonna Shift A to add auto layout, vertical, 0, 0. I'm gonna add 16 pixels of spacing between the two. So let's add a nice title here, like an introduction to Figma's auto layout feature. And let's make this title a bit smaller, excuse me. Something like this will align it with the grid. So we're using up 8 columns. And then let's add the meta information. And for the meta, it's probably a good idea to use the caption style. So let's paste that in. And we'll say something like by, let's say Mark Adams as a fictional name. Let's Shift A this to create another auto layout frame. This one is horizontal, so I can very easily just do this. This will be for the date, and this will be for the comments. Now, some of these will be links, so we need to address that. The author name will be a link, so let's do underline. Let's do this underline. This can be a link as well, but not all themes have this date as a link. In my case, I'll just leave it like this. And for the category, let's just say, I don't know, UI tools, something like that. So with this, the header of our article or of our post is done. Now, as you can see here, now we're creating a WordPress post that has no image, no cover image. Normally, I would put an image here, but since we don't have one, we're going to put a separator. So we're going to go to our basic patterns. We're going to grab our separator, and we're going to paste it in. Just like that. Make this bigger. I'm going to make it 1200 minus 48. That's 1152. And then we have the content. So let's go back here. Let's grab some body text and let's paste it right here in the frame. And I'm going to size this so it occupies about 7 columns. And I'm also going to just put some lorem ipsum in there, just for the lack of an alternative right here. I'm just going to leave 2 paragraphs. That's enough. Okay, so that's that will signify the content, but obviously in a blog post, the content is going to be much more elaborate than this. And then we need to add a reference to the author, a little about section about the author of the post. So for that, we're going to start with a one of these small separators. Let's put that in. And below that, we're going to add, first of all, an image. So let's do an oval here. And we're going to do probably like 96 by 96, or I think that's a bit too big. Let's do 64 by 64 to maintain our correct sizing system. So that's going to be for the image. And let's get Unsplash here. Let's search for a face. Let's put this. Cool. And what else? Well, we need a small title that's going to say about the author, and then another short description of the author. So for the title, I'm going to use this display X small. And let's actually do this. Let's add the description. And for the description, I'm going to use the body to style. See where this comes in handy. Let's just add a random description here. And let's also change the colors here because they're a bit off. So let's go back to our design. We're going to use gray 80 for the body text. And actually this, the headings will have gray 100. Let's make sure to change that as well. All right, so we're going to make one auto layout frame for the title and description. I'm going to add 16 pixels of distance there. Make sure everything is aligned to the left. And then I'm going to select these and make another auto layout frame. This is going to be horizontal. And let's make 32 pixels in between the two. And we got to make sure that these elements are aligned, or let's make them aligned in the middle like that. And finally, let's resize this bit to kind of fit our grid here. Cool, not bad. Now let's duplicate this separator like that. And let's add the section for comments. For that, we need a title first. So I'm going to use display small, and we're going to say 2 replies to, and the name of the post. Let's size this so it matches the text above. Great. And now let's style the comments. For that, I'm going to grab this frame, copy it, and I'm going to paste it right here. And I'm going to position this 32 pixels from this title. We're going to keep roughly the same characteristics, but we're going to align everything to the top. And we're going to make this bigger. We're going to make it so that it matches the content of the post. The body of the comment is going to be using our main body text, which is Lato, 18 pixels. The title here is also going to be the body text, Lato, but we're going to use bold, 18. And we're also going to add the date of this comment. So the date looks something like this. We're going to use PT serif, italic, 13, 24 pixel line height. And for the color, well, we're going to use the exact same color that we used here. Okay, now we need a slightly different spacing here because these are spaced out at 16. So I want the spacing at 8, but I want a little bit more spacing on the actual comment body. So I'm going to add another frame, vertical, 0 on the sides. I'm going to add 16 on the top and bottom, and 16, or actually 32 as a distance between items, because we're going to add a button to it. We're going to grab one of these small buttons and we're going to place it right here. And this will be a reply button. Okay, so now this is at 24 pixels from the meta, and this is at 32 pixels from the comment text. Let's see how that looks like. It's a bit disproportionate, so let's fix that. Let's do 24 here as well. Okay, so that looks much better. So let's change the author here, and let's also change this picture. Let's just select one that matches the name, and then select this frame, duplicate it, and just move it down like this. And we can actually select both of these, Shift A to create auto layout, and just change the distance between the two to 64, for example. So then just, pick another color, and then just change the name, change the date, change the comment here, and we're pretty much good to go. Let's also change this picture so it matches. Now let's look for an Eduardo. This looks like an Eduardo. We have the title for the comment section. We have the comments themselves. Now we just need a section for leaving a comment with the comment form. For that, let's duplicate this title. Let's move it further down. Let's say I want to leave about 64 pixels of distance between the two. Leave a reply, and here we can actually grab a piece of text and we can move it right here, and we're going to leave 32 pixels of distance between the two. And this text will say something like, your email address will not be published and required fields are marked with an asterisk. So then we need to get a form. So we'll go to our basic patterns. We're going to take this bit and we're going to group it up, copy it, and we're going to paste it right here. Also leaving 32 pixels at the bottom there. So what do we need for like a comment form? We need a name, we need an email address, we need a website, which is optional, but the name is mandatory, email address. I don't actually know if it's mandatory or not, but I'll just put an asterisk here. And we have the comment, to which I'm going to put an asterisk. And for the button, we'll just say submit comment. Cool beans. Let's also change the width of this text area to match our grid. And I believe that we are Done. Let's go ahead and hide this, this grid. Let's give it a final look. Let's see. We have the header with the title and the meta information. We have the content, a section about the author, comment area, and then a reply area. And that's like the most basic thing you can do to a post. Cool. Now, if you remember, I said that this post had no image, but what if it does? Well, let's go ahead and duplicate this. And I'm going to say right here, come on, with image. Cool. So what I'm going to do for this simply is just grab this, increase its height to about 560, and I'm going to use the plugin to add an image to it. Nice. So now what we have to do is move the other stuff further down the line. So what do we have here? We have the content, right? We have the content, this, these. So just grab everything and move further down. And now this is what a post with a featured image looks like. We basically replaced this separator with an image while keeping the same 64 pixel padding on the top and bottom, or margin, whatever you want to call it. So there you go. That's the Figma part of designing these posts. Now, what you can do is go into Notion, Advanced Patterns. You can say a new page, WordPress Posts. So in here, you can document things like structure. And you go like this: category, title, meta, separator or image, content, author bio, separator, replies, and reply form. All right, so that's the structure. And then you can start going into details. Like, how many columns should the content have? How many columns should the title have? What about the author? How are you aligning the image with the content? What kind of style are you using for this title here? What kind of style are you using for this this description, right? What sort of separators are you using? Regular or small? What about the comments, right? You can start documenting all of these things. So when you come back later and you want to recreate this, you have something to fall back on. All right, so the WordPress post is now designed and it's ready to be used. The final thing we need to design in these advanced patterns is headers and footers, and we're going to deal with that in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to design and document two components that are repeating themselves in every page of our WordPress theme. And those components are the header and the footer. So let's begin. I got a head start in Figma and created a couple of different frames. We're going to build each component in two versions, one for desktop, one for phone. So let's begin with the header desktop. I'm going to start by making another frame inside this one. And I'm going to make it 1200. And I'm going to add a layout grid to it. It's going to be columns, 12. Let's change this to a nicer color. 24 and 24. So 24 margin, 24 gutter. All right. So now our header is very, very simple. We're going to have a logo on one side, navigation menu on the other. For the logo, I'm going to use a very simple placeholder logo that I've been using in my projects. Let's add a height of 48 pixels to this one. And we're going to move it to the top. And then for the menu, well, let's just go ahead and grab this menu right here, paste it in. Let's update some of these links to have the correct color. Let's move this to the right. And let's align these like so. And now we can hide the layout and we're good to go. This is our desktop header. Now, on the phone header, let's do the same thing, create a frame. We're going to make this 500 pixels, add a layout grid. If you remember, on the phone, we have two columns. Again, 24 margin, 24 gutter. So now we got to fit this into a much smaller format. So I'm going to paste in the logo, and instead of the menu, we're going to use a hamburger menu icon. So let's go back to our icons. We're going to grab this, copy, paste it in, align this to the middle, align it like this, hide our grid, and there we go. That's our phone header. Now, let's move on to the footer. Our footer will have some widgets. We're going to put 2 for now, a menu, and a copyright notice. So let's again start with a frame, and we can actually go in here. Oops, sorry about that. We can actually go in here and just copy this frame because it already has our grid. We can delete these 2. Let's hide the grid again. And the first thing we'll do is start with a separator. So let's jump to that page. Let's grab this separator, paste it in here. And let's make its width 1200 minus 48. So that's going to span the exact width of our columns here. Next, let's add some widgets. We're going to put maybe recent comments and recent posts. So let's copy these, paste them in like so. And let's make these, or make sure they fit 6 columns each. So let's copy recent posts and align it like that. Cool. Next, let's create another separator in here between the widgets and the footer menu. So let's go back to separators, grab this. Oops. Paste it in, align it like that. Next, let's grab the footer menu, paste it like so. Let's fix this link here. And finally, we're going to add a small copyright notice. So let's grab a paragraph and let's position this paragraph 64 pixels from the footer menu like that. And inside, simply say copyright 2020, all rights reserved, you know, the usual drill. Okay, let's hide this. And now our desktop footer is done. Now we got to fit all of this into the phone footer. So let's start by copying this frame, pasting it in. Let's get rid of these elements. And we're going to start with the first element here, which is the separator. Let's make this a bit longer. Paste that in, and we'll make its width 500 minus 48. And if you're wondering why 48, because I have 24 pixels on the sides here as the margin for the grid. Next, let's grab this widget. Let's make it smaller, like that. Just make sure it matches our columns there. Let's grab recent posts. And I'm going to position this 64 pixels from the other widget. And what else? We have a little separator here. So let's grab that. Paste it in. And then we have the footer menu and the copyright notice. So let's paste those in as well. Now on this footer menu, we're going to make it vertical instead of horizontal. And we just have to make sure that all the items are aligned to the left, like so. And then for the copyright notice, we're going to position it 64 pixels from this menu. And let's do a quick resizing here. And we should be good to go. Let's resize this frame. And let's hide the grid. And there you go. We now have two versions for the header and the footer. One for desktop, one for the phone. And this will come in very handy later when we build our pages. Now, for the actual documentation, you can jump into your chosen software and you can create a new page here in advanced patterns, headers and footers. And inside, well, you can document the header and the footer. And for each, you can write stuff like its structure. Like, so what do you have in the header? What do we have in the footer? What are the dimensions and measurements for this? How tall is the logo? What's the distance between, I don't know, this menu item or this menu and the copyright notice? What's the distance between these two widgets when they're in footer, when they're in phone mode, right? You can write down all of these things. What are the differences between desktop versus phone? What happens on tablet? Does the layout change? So you need to document all of these important things so that when you come back later on, you'll know exactly what's going on there. And with that, we've finished designing and documenting all of our patterns, all of our components. Next, it's time to define some page layouts and then design a demo page in the final lesson of this course. But for now, I'll see you in the next lesson where we'll just quickly sketch out a few page layouts. See you there. Welcome back to the course. In this chapter, we're gonna be defining some page layouts and also designing a full page, the index. But for now, let's get going with the sketches. So I made a simple frame here in Figma, and we're gonna use, I guess, a wireframing method here. I'm just gonna create something really quick. It doesn't have to be too fancy or anything. Let's go with something like this. Let's add some text. Let's make this text white. Let's add a little bit of padding here. Okay. So for the index page, we have a header, and then we have our posts, and then we have a sidebar, and then we have a footer. Now the posts and sidebar are actually going to be put one on the left, one on the right, right? So something like this. This is the most basic sketch of the page we can do. And we don't have to go into more detail because the header, well, that's already defined. The posts, most of it is already defined. We have these, right? We just have to adapt them a little bit. The sidebar, well, we have the widgets defined. And the footer, well, that's defined as well. Look, right here. All we have to do is just drag and drop, make a few changes, and our page is done. Now, the next page is the post page. So this is the one that displays the content of a single post, right? So for this, we have a header. We have the post content. We don't actually have a sidebar there. And then we have the footer. Next is the archive page. For this, we have the header and the footer. These are repeating in every page. And then we have the archive content. And we also have here on the top the archive parameters. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look inside here in our WordPress theme, right? If I go to the author archives, there it is. This is the header. These are the archive parameters. In this case, they're posts listed by the author. And then it's the archive content. And all the way down is the footer. Same thing if we do a search. This is another archive. So we have archive parameters, archive content. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. And finally, the last page is single. This is a standalone page. It has nothing to do with posts, and it can be any page you want. Here, it's very simple. You have header, footer, and in between a page content. All right. And those are the 4 pages that were initially required in our project brief, right? Index, post single, archive, and single page. So as a demo for this course and for the design system that we built, in the next and final lesson of this course, we're going to build this index page based, of course, on this very crude sketch. Now, you might be saying that, Adi, there are more pages to a WordPress site than this, right? What about a contact page? Well, yes, you can create as many pages as you want in your WordPress site. But for this course, I made this short list with the most important pages, right? With the ones that you must definitely create, right? Because not all WordPress sites have a portfolio page, right? Or an about page. They could just have a home page with some bio on the author. They might even not have a home page at all. It can be just this index page. But these, the index, the page, the archive, and the single, these are the pages that you need to account for when building a WordPress theme. So for whatever project you're building with WordPress, go ahead and create sketches or wireframes for the rest of the pages that you have. Maybe you have an about page, a contact page, a portfolio page, services, right? It can vary from project to project. So go ahead, make wireframes for those as detailed as you want. And make sure you document these things as well in your design system document. Go ahead and create new pages for them, detail their structure, their purpose, and so on. Now, coming back to this course, for this final lesson, let's go ahead and use our design system and create the index page. That's coming up. Welcome back to the course. In this final lesson, we're going to take the design system that we've built and create a full page, the index. And hopefully this process will show you how to create the rest of the pages based on the same design system. So let's go. I'm going to start by creating a new page here in Figma, and I'm going to call it full pages index. Create a frame. Let's call this index. And inside of it, let's create another frame, 1200 pixels. Let's do like 2000 for the height. And let's add a layout grid, columns, 12. Something like that, 24 margin, 24 gutter. Okay, so with this, let's align it in the middle and at the top. And let's actually add an auto layout to this parent frame so that it resizes automatically with my inner frame. Okay, so where do we start? Well, with our little sketch here, right? The index page. First, we have a header. So let's go ahead and grab that. We'll go to headers and footers. We'll grab the one for desktop, copy, paste. Let's align it properly. And let's leave about 64 pixels from the top. We can also use auto layout for this frame, but that takes a little bit longer to set up. So I'm just gonna do it the old-fashioned way, just in case you're using some other software that doesn't have auto layout. All right, so that's the header. What's next? We have posts and sidebar. Okay, let's start with the posts. So we're gonna grab this post right here, or actually, we don't need all of it. We just need the first part. So we're going to grab this, this, and this. Copy, paste, and let's position these at about 128 from the header. Just leave lots of room for breathing there. Now, as a small change compared to what we did here, we're going to remove the separator just to keep things a bit nicer. And we're going to position this at about 48 pixels from the post intro. And also, we're going to make this a bit smaller because I want my sidebar to fit in 4 columns, and I also want 1 column of empty space between the 2 sides. So let's change this. All right, let's bring this back up to 48 pixels, like so. And we also need to add a little button here for read more. So let's go to buttons. We'll grab one of these medium buttons, paste that in. And now that I think about it, I think a little bit more or a little bit less space between these 2 elements is probably a good thing. So let's go 32 pixels here and also 32 pixels here. All right, let's take a look at it without the grid. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So now we have this, this, and this. We can do an auto layout for them. Also, let's make this a little bit bigger. All right, so now we have this, this, and this. Here we can do an auto layout. It's gonna automatically switch to vertical with 32 pixels between items, so that's cool. And now what we can do is just duplicate this bit, move it down, leave 128 pixels between these 2, And now I can also select these and hit Shift A to create another frame with auto layout. Notice that it automatically added 128 between items. So now what I can do is just Command D, duplicate a post here, and it's automatically gonna be positioned correctly. Now let's move on to the sidebar. For this, we're gonna add 2 widgets, and let's see where those are. Right here. We're gonna use the search widget and categories. So grab the search, position it right there, like so. And we gotta do a quick change to the width of this element. Let's change that width so that it matches our 4 columns. We're gonna skip the widget title on this case, but we will use it on the categories here. So let's grab that, copy, paste it in. We're gonna leave 64 pixels between these two, and we can also Shift A these into a new frame with auto layout. So then when I create another widget, it's automatically gonna be positioned correctly. Okay, so far so good. We have the header, we have the content or the posts, and we have the sidebar. Finally, we got to add the footer. So let's go grab our desktop footer, copy that, paste it in. Okay, and let's make sure we have 64 pixels of space here. Let's hide our columns, and here we go. This is our index page, created in a matter of minutes, simply because we used our design system and we had those components already built. Final thing to do here, which I forgot, is to change the text on these buttons. They should just say read more. Like so. All right, and that's how you can use the design system to create a page for our WordPress theme. And you can apply the same process to the rest of the pages, and I guarantee you'll get great results. Now, please join me in the next lesson for the conclusion of this course. See you there. Hey, you've made it to the end of this course, so thank you very much for watching. It was a rather lengthy one, so I do appreciate you sticking around until the very end. Now, before we wrap things up, I just want to make 2 quick points. Number one, as you saw in this course, we took a slightly different approach for designing this theme. So instead of going the usual way, designing the theme page by page, we took a design system approach. And I think it worked out really well, actually. Even if we didn't have time in this course to document everything as you should be doing in the case of a real project, I think this approach allowed us to have a pretty good workflow, to be honest. You saw how easy it was to build a page once we had everything laid out, right? And you saw how easy it was to build components once we had all the bases figured out, like colors and typography and sizing, spacing, all of that stuff. That made it really easy for us to just go ahead and grab this information and create whatever components we needed. So definitely a plus. So if you ask me now, would you do it again? Would you use the same approach, versus traditional? I would say yes. I think design systems are starting to become more important part of any project, of any web project, really. So having one from the very start, I think it's a great thing. Now, the second point is that every WordPress theme or WordPress site is different, right? Depending on your content, you might have fewer pages, more pages. The ones that I showed you here, the 4, index, post, archive, and single, they're the basic ones, right? You should always have those. You should always design for those. But if you have more pages, you simply repeat the same process that I showed you, right? You create a simple wireframe, even if it's just like blocks, like we did in this course. It gives you a visual idea of what's going on that page, and based on the components that you designed, you simply start copying and pasting, arranging them in the page using the grid system, and before you know it, you'll be able to create lots and lots of pages using that design system. So I encourage you to experiment with this approach and see what you come up with. And by the way, this doesn't apply to just WordPress themes. It applies to any web project, really. Even if you're just building a static website, the same thing applies, right? This course was about WordPress because I was trying to give you the basics of working with WordPress themes. But what I showed you here applies everywhere. Oh, with that said, I would like to thank you very much for watching again. And until next time, I'm Adi Purdila. Take care.